Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
To do that, and I've been a fan for a really long time, man. Really, seriously, like going back probably 15 years.
That's the best beginning you can find.
Yeah, that's it, right?
Samo, my pleasure too. My pleasure. Big pleasure.
No, and it's we actually shared the same co-bill. I think it was my last concert before the Corona lockdown in Sankarjev Dom. I played with my trio, and you played with Dan Terzic and Matt Penman and Chris Speed in Sankarjev Dom. And I saw you guys, especially watching you, and you're like a chameleon. Whenever someone puts you, you're just like burn the stuff. And how was that tour?
I think I can be a chameleon when it's about music.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it would be something, because definitely I've started as in a large basis, between classical music, folk music that I was listening to in spite of my wish, and the rock music that I started quite early as well. So yeah, that's what you can call quite a huge base for the start, and I actually kept it all because that's what music is about. I mean, I function on emotion, not cerebrally. That comes definitely way after my emotions that I get through music. So whatever you call it, if it's emotional, I'm going to react to it. So it's same thing with the Dejan Terzic or with the Amira Bendunin, to take just the few of the things that are quite opposite in the musical content and musical approach.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I heard you in so many contexts, and in every context, like you said, you feel so comfortable. Like, I hear it just like, wherever you are, like, wow, that's him. It's just like watching you. It's really cool to watch you. So
maybe, maybe something about the generation in which I grew up musically has to do a little bit with this. It's or maybe it's all bullshit, but let me at least spit it out, and then somebody else can think about it. But it's true that I grew up in the times where imitating the others was, of course, one of the ways to learn certain things. But if you would go on stage, even as a young musician, and then you would play phrases or licks of, I don't know, Wynton Kelly or Red Garland or somebody like this, the reaction would be like, oh, come on. It's like, bravo, but that's not why you're here. So it was like very early that we were pushed in the direction and in the idea that actually there is place for us to come up with something that is yours, your style, your sound, your blah, 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 stuff like this. And that was the purpose. One of the purposes was, of course, to find your own path. So that's maybe the thing that makes the fact that I can be recognized in whatever musical context it is. Maybe not.
Yeah, no, but it makes sense. But you mentioned, okay, now Wynton Kelly and Red Garland, for instance. I really want to go back and ask you, like, who were the first jazz piano players that blew your mind?
First information's about early jazz. I mean, using these terms, jazz, which period. Of course, I relate to all of them, and I think I'm somebody who knows pretty well the history. And at the same time, if we would start to speak about what the fuck is jazz, we could spend hours and hours on it. But for me, it's really one of the best things I can say about it, to make it to differ it from other approaches to music, is that it's a very specific approach to music that brought certain amount and the historical periods of aesthetics. So globally, it is an African approach, which is concerning the written notes towards any kind of music, but the ones that was proposed to them in the terms of survival as human beings was European music, and it all happened in a third neutral land, which was the land of what you call nowadays the United States of America, where they were taken as slaves. So that's this culture melting that is at the base of this was more interesting to me than the idioms in question, because I do come from European classical music training.
Yeah.
In spite of the fact that I was not a good one. I mean, I was pretty quickly not interested in being a concert pianist. Okay. And practicing this music for hours to be able to play it. I would very early add some notes in Mozart because I found his chords pretty poor. And of course, it was one of the reasons why they wanted to throw me out of the school. And on the other hand, I was, through rock music and blues, I was definitely interested about the blackness of the music, the music and the things that, so they said, were coming from Africa, And pretty quickly, I moved from American jazz to search more the roots. And then at the same time, searching for the roots, being from the Balkans and have listened to all this folk music, as I said, in spite of myself. Well, that too led me to wonder, where does this particular thing come from? These roots. So pretty early, I think at the age of 15, I started already wandering and trying to listen to music from Egypt, from any kind of African countries. That's something I discovered much more when I moved to France at the age of 20.
Why did you move to France? I really wanted to ask you that. I never didn't find that.
I was lucky enough, to have the American dream as any young jazz musician from wherever they are. I was, from Belgrade. And I was lucky to go there when I was 18. I had a scholarship as which was proposed to. Well, there were conditions. The conditions were very simple. He should be less than 18, and he or she should be able to play already and to know be already a ready musician. And believe me, there were not many of them at the age of 18 or until 18 who were already playing on stage this music. And that was the case with me, because I really started quite early. I think at the age of 15, I went to Grozny.
Oh yeah.
And I discovered jazz. Mostly what got me there was that I saw the drummers reading sheet music. Oh God, drummers reading. Because before this, of course, I was already making bands with my brother in Belgrade, where we were playing, bossa nova. Our compositions, they were more like bossa nova, Pat Metheny, kind of music, because that's what we were listening to back then. But to come back to your original question, that I kind of already shifted far from, my first influences of jazz piano, or those that I heard, were coming from my dad's LP library, and it was of course Oscar Peterson, and who else, and Duke Ellington, even though it took me much more years after to grasp the importance of somebody as a pianist, of somebody like Duke Ellington. And I'm still listening to his albums nowadays, and I'm inspired so strongly by listening to him, actually much more than any other pianist that I listened to in the meantime. And I think I did listen to all of them. Those that are recognized as very important to the jazz history. But
you mentioned then moving to Paris when you were 18, so that was like late 80s, right?
I was 20. But I counted almost like 18 because I went to do my army service in the meantime.
Of course. We still had to do that,
Yeah, I still had to do it. Actually, that's why I really came back from US On one hand, they did propose me the scholarship, and I truly did not feel like living in this country.
Yeah.
And now, not just now, but now you can really see why. At this particular moment. It's, you know, I already discovered certain things back in '86, which is when I was 18. Things I liked and things I didn't like at all. And the thing I really didn't like at all, and that definitely pushed me out, was that I really felt on my own skin how easy it was to become a star. For me, it took only one call from Claire Fisher, the pianist, who called me to join him on the stage in front of 3,000 students. And all these girls that I was running after, you know, being 18, when I came after these 3 tunes that I played with him in standing ovation, I went to go down from the stage, and there was a line of all these girls that I was running after that ignored me completely. And they were all waiting for me, you know, to cheer and to hug me and to have a fucking autograph. Yeah. But then that was the easy come part.
Okay.
Amazing. Well, you know, it's nice to be a star. But then, like a few days after, I realized that the next guy that goes on the stage, and he has something different or more interesting than me, I'm forgotten in a few seconds as well. So it's really like easy come and easy go. Yeah. Which was, you know, definitely not what I learned as human being living in Europe. This particular thing was already shocking me to the point that I didn't feel like living in US.
But many European musicians especially mention this, like especially nowadays, even it's more visible.
But there is something positive in being union. I mean, it would make my business side, I guess, much more easy in a sense that, you know, they do the business without any obstacles. Take care of your business. Shit, me. While for me, you know, I'm not a good businessman, and I'm more like taking my career as a consequence of the fact that I'm playing music than some plan, you know. So that's really what could have been more useful for me if I would have lived in US. But on the other hand, I mean, I'm really not at all regretting the fact, because it's anyhow, it's easier for me to go there from here than if I would be, you know, to come there.
Definitely, But as a musician then who lived in Paris in the late 80s, how was it like for you in the beginning to make a name on the scene? I mean, how did you meet? Who were the first musicians you started to play with, the Parisian musicians?
Okay, so one of the first musicians that I remembered once I was in Paris, that I knew him from Belgrade, because his mother was Serb from Belgrade, and it was Noël Akchoté. I don't know if you know.
Oh yeah, I love him. Yeah, I love Noël. Yeah, he's an amazing guitarist.
So Noël was the first guy, because I actually met him when we were 15. Both of us, we were the same age. And you know, one of the main reasons why I had to move out from Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Belgrade, is that, you know, somehow when I reached age of 18, I was already appointed as a official pianist of Radio Big Band Belgrade, which is like the summum of your career. Even
I know,
today.
I know.
And you know, barely started and already did it all. That was like no, don't tell me that that's it.
Yeah.
So I definitely had to go somewhere, and I was more looking, because, you know, I was playing more with older guys in Belgrade, which, you know, what it meant. I mean, I was 16 and they were 22, you know. So but that was, you know, all of them, they were bald with beard. So the thing is that I really felt like finding the guys from my own generation, because there is something pretty strong if you manage to put yourself in an environment where you are surrounded by the guys of your age that listened to the same kind of music and that received the similar kind of energy wherever they come from.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be true, this idea I had back in the time. So Noel was the first guy that I met. He played in one of the clubs here. And when I saw his name, I said, hey, man, I know him, you know. So I went there and I listened to his quartet. And we spoke afterwards, and he remembered me, and we started really like hanging in all the clubs every night in Paris. And he knew Paris by heart, being born in Paris. And he was already like at the age of 14 and 15, he was hanging with Chet Baker, Philippe Catherine, you know, all these guys, because he was deeply in love with jazz since he was very young, which was our common point.
Yeah. That's perfect.
And then through him, of course, I managed to meet the other guys that became my music partners. Noel was first of them, and we played together until the age of 93, 94, when he evolved in one direction, I evolved in the other direction. But we still are very, very good friends and close, and we write to each other whenever we can. But the others were, of course, those that formed my first quartet.
Julien,
and Marc Buronfosse and Francois Merville, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And through them, I met Henri Texier, through whom I met Michel Portal, blah, blah, blah.
That's how it goes.
That's how it went.
I want to ask you about Henri Texier later, but I would like to ask you about this first two albums. You did the Quartet and Yopla, and I think you were one of the first guys, at least in my ears, I'll put it like that, who kind of introduced this Balkan rhythms more into jazz, like in this, how you did it, you know, like the taka 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 taka, like, you know, like there were of course odd meters before, but like you were definitely one of the first. And I wanted to ask you, how did the musicians in your band react when you first brought them, I don't know, lead sheets of you know, Multi Don Culti or whatever, like those strange rhythms, at least for the Western part, maybe. How was that experience in your eyes?
It was a great experience. But before we come to this point, I definitely would like to mention the fact that I was inspired by others who did it before me. You could already, you know, I was listening. I saw as a kid many live concerts of Lala Kovacev Balkan Impressions, which was one great, successful gathering of jazz idiom with the folk music from Serbia. And that was the first one. Second one, of course, which was much more flirting with jazz, but in a very successful way, was Duško Gojković and some of his albums.
Of course.
Then, of course, as a kid, I was listening to Revisin and
Vlatko.
these rock bands who were doing these things. But definitely, there was one point in all of these things, except there was a piano player playing with the Lala Kovacev, but it never really. It was more like, you know, he was playing his McCoy Tyner over, because it works with folk music. And it gives this African approach. But globally, in the narration, on the melodies and ornaments, nobody really approached this thing on the piano, because it's more like clarinet and accordion, because of the fact that all these rapid notes are super difficult to play on the piano. Let's put it in a very simple way. So first guys that kind of inspired me as well in piano directions were, first of all, Milcho Leviev, that I heard as a pianist of Art Pepper. And that's where I heard I know exactly which points I heard this particular Balkan thing that in the middle of the jazz world, that really like rang like straight away with something inside of me. And of course, certain of the moments of Keith Jarrett as well, during his early years that I was listening since 70s and everything. So that's the those who inspired me. But it is true that on the Western European scene, those who I was lucky that when I moved to France, I was already in a larger light, of the stage, jazz stage, than if you would be somebody from an Eastern country. It's stuff like this, And the fact that I did it with the musicians coming from France was an interesting part, because, like you asked me, when I started speaking about these rhythms, the first one who really got interested in this was Julien Lourau, because when I met him, he was 2 years younger than me, and he already had like all the Michael Brecker, Bob Berg licks, and he knew bebop and Coltrane and everything, which was the thing that I really expected of somebody of my age. Like, let's get this shit done until we're 20. And then we can actually discover all the rest. So that's why we still are playing together, because this is what I mentioned as a generation strength, is that I found in him somebody who listened everything that I have listened, but in just a different order. And then it gave us the possibility where from that point we could evolve and go and really try even to invent some other connections and mixes of the inspirations. So actually it's with him that I worked the most on ornamentation, listening to other Balkan players like Ivo Papasov and Ferus Mustafov and all these things, and that's when I was slowing them down in the same way that I would slow down, I don't know, Wynton Kelly to understand his ornamentations. Of course, this I had to slow down to understand it. I understood that almost every note is played being bent up by half step. God, man. And then you had to sit down on the piano and dish it out, because it's easy to do this on accordion.
Milan Savko, like.
Exactly, and Petar Rajcev and all these great virtuosos. But man, on the piano, it's a different thing. And I really remember when I was sitting, not here, I didn't live in this house, but in the other house, like a little laboratory in my dreams, and working my fingers out how to do it. Oh God, because I listen to this music enough so that I have it in my ears, but how to spit it out through the fingers was a completely different story. And about this particular thing, maybe this already sounds like the end, but I have to mention it now, because it's one of my big pleasures of recent times, is that I when was it? It was like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. I was at the Berklee School of Music, and we had a concert with Amira Medunjanin there, because now Berklee became like a factory.
Sure.
Whatever style of music you're interested, if you've got $80,000, you're in. You know what I'm talking about. So whatever. Anyhow, I found myself there, and there was a girl singer from Serbia who was doing her recital, like a end of the studies thing, one of the evenings when we were free. And I came there and I sat in the front row with Amira, and she was playing with different musicians. There were pianists, they just got Thelonious Monk prize from Israel, etc., 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 etc. And really, I could, like somewhere in the middle of this, I was overwhelmed by a very specific feeling that I remembered the times when I was sitting and trying to sort out this the things on the piano. And here I am sitting in Berklee School of Music, listening to the guys coming from different pianists coming from wherever, and they're playing this shit. It became like a mainstream thing nowadays that the pianists, of course, in the meantime, you had many other guys who went in this direction. Avishai Cohen started doing this shit. But it was like a few years after we did it. And then through him, you had all these, great pianists like Shai Maestro. And of course, Tigran, who really pushed this thing in a very far. But it was such a big fulfillment for me. I mean, I don't care about glory and having my monument or anything like this, but I had so clearly these moments when I was sitting in a room and trying to figure out, like, how the fuck will you make this thing on this instrument? And to see that like 30 years after, sorry, that was the mother, but she can wait.
Okay.
I think I'll turn out the Viber. That's the best way.
Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Not being able to reach me. Okay. Sorry for this.
No.
And, you know, like 20, 30 years after, seeing that this was not a waste of time.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it spoke to many other people. Some of them listened to my albums, some of them didn't. But globally, you know how it goes. It's like, like I told, I didn't start it.
Yeah,
I was inspired by the others.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
particular thing is why I like being spoken of as a jazz musician, because this particular thing exists in a very clear way in jazz music, much more clear than, I don't know, in pop music and stuff like this. Because in pop music, very early, they started promoting, each musician had to say that he's the genius. He's the born genius. Before him, there was nothing. After him, there would be. That's, you know, this marketing bullshit that we all have to follow nowadays because of the habit that the people got through social medias.
Yeah.
But I'm more than proud of the fact that, you know, I learned from the others, and I still do. And I see that as well as I'm teaching, and I see many people who come to me after the concerts and tell me, like, you know, man, your albums were the first inspiration to go in this direction, which happened with Tigran, you know. And
oh, really? Oh, wow.
That's the big satisfaction, enormous satisfaction, because we
Yeah.
all put a brick to make, you know, this beautiful wall.
Yeah. No, it's what you mentioned. You were talking about this, you know, the ornaments, let's call them. But when I listen to you, like either playing solo or in a band format, I wanted to ask you, how do you improvise, let's say, over odd meters also? You know, like how did you practice this? Like, in a sense, you know, it's easy now to talk about the 11 or 7 or 9 or whatever, but how do you feel
nowadays? But
feel
you know,
comfortable?
the thing is that maybe there was an advantage compared to somebody coming from France, definitely, or somebody coming from Michigan, or somebody coming from God knows where, Russia. But in the fact that I have been listening to this music since I was, you know, a young boy, because I can play you the first riff that I heard from. I think I still have it. Hold on, just a second. So that was the first riff on clarinet that was played on the first album of Revisin, and I think I was like.
That's Devetka, no? It's like it's seven. It's a 7. Yeah.
No, it's 9. Sorry.
9. Yeah, it's 9. Yeah. Yeah, it's 9. Yeah. I love this song.
So, you know, that I heard this when it was released. You know, it was like 73 or 4, something like this. So, you know, of course, my mind already started working on certain rhythms, and I can tell you that 9 is one of those that haunted me through and still haunts me, because I think I have written the tunes in this particular Czocek, you know, I think I really wrote like 5, 6, 7 tunes in this rhythm, and I have been practicing for years because it's something that I like a lot.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. There is I think affinity, which is definitely the motor that pushes you to enjoy while still working. And but I approached it in spite of this eventual how do you say, advantage by the fact that I listened to this music as a kid. I had to work on it as anybody else coming from any other place, which means I had to program the rhythm machine in 9 and to get the very clear ostinato, and then start
playing,
getting my mind used, and then after my body used, to be able to play on these rhythmical formulas and speaking something that made sense.
Yeah.
It's not just, you know, putting the lines or the notes and they fit into, no, you have to make some sense, you know. You know, whatever. But really feeling this formula as something that you are comfortable with. And
that takes time, yeah.
A lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's one of the best connections of you playing this odd meters was that album Koreni that you did with Karim Ziad.
Karim was actually only playing percussions. It was Tony Rabeson from Madagascar.
Rabeson is, yeah. But how did you guys?
He's playing drums and Karim is doing only karkabuz.
What a luxury! Yeah.
You know, there is it makes me in a very unmodest way think of the Quiet Nights, the album of Gil Evans with Miles Davis.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, one day I discovered, you know who's playing congas on this album?
No.
Elton Jones.
No. Really? I have to check. Really? I have to check this out. That's so
Elton Jones playing congas. You know?
Wow. Okay.
You know, that's the real luxury. So in the same way, I had Karim Ziad playing only, you know,
But that connection really worked on that album, right? With Kudsi, Erguner also and Vlatko and like.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely, you know, I started not flirting. I started working on this already on my first album.
Yeah.
I developed it more. And there is already Kudsi that I met in Paris. And I was amazed to find out that this guy that I listened on albums of Real World, Peter Gabriel's label.
Yeah.
That's where I first heard Kudsi. And I just could not believe, you know, that's one of the first moments when I thought about genes. You know, like, I don't know how to explain them, but, you know, when I heard the sound of Kutsi's ney, I really thought like maybe my you know, ancestors coming from Turkey and God knows where, and but whatever, it can only be something that is you know, like a cell memory. Whatever. I mean, I will not explain myself of today by the past.
Yeah, sure.
But it was a very strange strength that I felt when I heard him first time. Then I found out that he lives in Paris, and so finally I met him and I invited him to play on this album, which was Yopla.
Yopla, yeah.
And that was already, we pushed the things forward with his presence, and it really turned the, you know, this Balkan thing was pretty present, but not in a, you know, not in a real Balkan way. I didn't really, you know, even though we did take already the songs issued from the folk music repertoire, but I always wanted to do with it something that was you know, close to my first interests, which was jazz.
Yeah.
And then the third, to come back, the Koreni was definitely like the end of the first chapter of this research. Of this, you know, jazz idiom and Balkan thing. And after that, I didn't pull it out in as clear way as I did on Koreni. So for me, the Koreni is like a summum of this kind of my first chapter of which was Balkan and jazz. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you kept it, but yeah, this was like really the exposure of this connection with the Balkan in a way.
Yeah, I kept it, but more as
as a jazz player,
the part of my personal vocabulary.
Yeah.
So even if I play, you know, swing jazz, well, you may hear that there are certain ornaments that don't come really from jazz.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like I assimilated this thing sufficiently so that it can be just a part of my
who you are,
my accent when I speak. You know?
Yeah, good. But you mentioned swing jazz now, so I wanted to ask you about those two what was it, Transpacifik and Xenophobia, two albums you did in New York.
Hold on, Xenophonia.
Oh yeah, exactly.
One letter is completely changing it.
See, exactly. It doesn't sound xenophobic. Yes.
Yeah, but you know the first one, you know, but you know, because the journalists, like all over France, they, you know, when this album was released, it was like, okay, so your new album, Xenophobia, look what is written.
Yeah.
So I had to tell, and then like but then I had to explain them it was of course a word game, and I was aware of the fact that the people will see Xenophobia, which was one of the reasons why I used it as a word game. But whatever, yeah, we'll speak about this.
But how did you connect with those guys? Actually, how was your, because you recorded with those amazing musicians, Nasheet Waits and Scott Colley, and like how did that story happen in part of your?
Yeah, and Ari Honing.
Yeah.
Well, I kept on connecting, living in Paris, definitely. I kept on, first I played through concerts with Henri Texier. I played with quite a lot of my idols, but that were more, their generation. So I played with Kenny Wheeler, I played with Joe Lovano.
Really, with Kenny Wheeler?
Yeah, I played with Kenny Wheeler.
How was that?
That was amazing.
He's one of my heroes, man. He's like...
I know. Well, he was, he still is one of my heroes, of course. So, and quite some other musicians. But I never, as I started, my first album was the Quartet. Then I moved from Quartet to quintet, then septet, then whatever, and then I did a solo album. Yeah. But as a pianist, most of the pianists, when they want to present themselves in the jazz world, another proof that I'm not the standard procedure.
That's good.
Because it took me it was my fourth album or fifth album that was finally the album in trio. Mm-hmm. So it was it corresponded to the idea that I already had a pretty nice career, and I made a name in France and in Europe by playing with as a sideman, with Henri Texier and Michel Portal and everything, and as well as a leader. But I've never recorded with the guys, with musicians from US. But I was already against the idea that I should record with, I don't know, Jack DeJohnette, just to pay him, and that would be the reason for him to play with me, and then it would make my renommee go up and stuff like this. No, I really wanted to have the real musical challenge and real musical reason to play with them, and to feel eventually that we had something to do in common. Mm-hmm. Not that with Jack DeJohnette that would not be.
No, sure. Yeah, I exactly know what you mean.
Which did show up afterwards, because I did manage to be on tour with him for 2 weeks and even produce an album with him. And
with Michel Portal, right? I want to ask you about that. Yeah,
with pleasure. But the thing is that I was still obsessed by this thing about generation, and in the meantime, through the concerts of John Zorn, I've seen Joy Baron, Dave Douglas, and they were already for example, Dave Douglas recorded his first album with Tiny Bell Trio the day after we recorded my first album in Sears Sound Studios in New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because we left our instruments there when we came to pick up instruments to go at the airport to go back to France. They were recording their first album. And you know what? The funny thing was the William Sear face when we entered, because they were playing music from the Balkans that he heard with us. And he was like, am I missing something or what? This is like a new shit. And that was so funny. So then I was, meeting the guys from the same generation as me. Mm-hmm. But through them, of course, I discovered other guys that were coming to play in France. So I heard Ben Perovsky playing with Chris Potter. Yeah. He was subbing for, I don't know which other drummer. Wow, Ben, he blew my mind. Then, of course, Ari Honing, that I heard with Kenny Werner first, and then with Jean-Michel Pilk. And then I heard Scott. Scott was playing at the same gig where I discovered Ben Perovsky. So when my new producer, who subbed the original producer of La Belle Bleue, so Pierre Valfis replaced Michel Oyer, and then he came with big ideas like, okay, now you've done your first little solo album, and and now let's go something bigger, maybe do an album with American musicians. Like, that's a must. But I already had musical reasons, not just career reasons. So I told him, okay, Scott Colley. Definitely, I wanted to play with Scott, to do something. Oh, great. And then I had to leave him some space because he wanted to do his producer.
Yeah.
So he mentioned Nasheet Waits that I never heard of. And then he sent me some recording. I remember it was Andrew Hill Trio with Scott and Nasheet.
Yeah.
Like I put the CD on, and 10 seconds after, I had I don't know why. That's the funny part. I had a sound of McCoy Steiner's album that I had on the tape when I lived in Belgrade called Expansions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I was wondering, why do I have this album that came in my mind? And Nasheet Waits. I was like, who's playing on this album? Okay, so I know it's blah, blah, blah. It's this and that, and that's Wayne Shorter. It's Woody Shaw. It's Gary Bartz. And it's Ron Carter playing cello. And, who's the drummer? Freddie Waits.
Yeah.
So the father of Nasheet playing. So how on earth did I have this association through Nasheet playing?
Yeah.
With the album that was recorded back in 67, 68, 69.
Did you tell Nasheet that?
Of course I told him.
Okay.
And he was not surprised. I mean, like, so yeah, basically that's when I said, of course, yeah, I want to play, I want to do something with him. But we basically met the day before the recording and we recorded the album. And then we were touring for 3-4 years with Nasheet. But Scott was not available because he was playing with Herbie Hancock at that moment.
Busy, yeah.
But luckily, like 10 years after, I found myself playing with Michel Portal. And it was after Jack DeJohnette, Nasheet stepped in and he replaced Jack. And we toured with this band. So it was like more or less my trio with who was Ambrose Akin Muzir and an old guy, Michel Portal,
Yeah.
That was fun.
But you mentioned, Michel Portal now, like, and Jack DeJohnette, and how was that story like? I mean, to play with these guys, especially, I mean, I'm a huge Michel Portal fan as well, like, not only mentioning Jack DeJohnette, but he's such a great player. And, how was that for you?
He's one of the guys that if you don't know him, either you love him, either you despise him. It's. But I'm aware of this since I met him the first time, because he does not fit. He's not a real jazz musician. He's not a real classical musician. But that makes it. But you know what? He's a real musician.
Yeah.
In spite of the fact that he's not neither this and neither that. And I met him when we were recording the first album with Henri Texier. He was invited at this album, and I kept contact with him ever since. And then he invited me, like a few months after that recording, he invited me to play with him. And I discovered a very particular personality to whom I saw that I could be helpful, in the sense that he does not know anything about rhythm section. He gives them the paper with the melody, and then he gives them the clues, like you maybe you do a sharp, 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 and then the drummer goes sharp, sharp, sharp. No. Why do you do this? Do some, And I've seen very, very, very odd situations where the drummers would really wonder, is he doing it on purpose or what? He doesn't like me and stuff like this. Yeah. So I found myself pretty useful as I think much more about the role of bass and the drums when thinking about tunes, that I could eventually give them some ideas of what Michel wanted. Yeah. And it worked pretty well as this role, and I liked it, having this role. And by extension, I just produced his second album. The first one was Bailador that we did with Jack DeJohnette. And so that's the thing that took me to this position. And so I know Michel already for 30 years. We worked together already for 30 years. I'm a bit less, like 28. And I could tell you a lot about him, but I think the best thing I can tell you is that I'm still learning, in spite of his chaotic and very specific French side of it. Oh, maybe I don't know, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm lucky to have met him, and he's lucky to have met me, because
Definitely.
I saved his ass but with pleasure, in many situations. And I'm pretty happy, I have to say this as well, about the album that will be released in 2 months.
Oh, really?
It's
Oh, wow.
one of the things that I was working on during the lockdown, so that kept me alive, because I was really having fun listening to the session that we recorded.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things. Now, playing with Jack DeJohnette, I mean, come on, man, it's my wet dreams since I was a kid.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
I mean, one of those that you don't even think that it will be, it will ever happen.
Yeah.
So the way it happened is even far from what I could have imagined, which means that I was the one that was leading the session, recording session. I was like,
The producer, right?
of the session and a pianist. So it was
How
funny.
did that go?
Well, it was funny because he knows Michel, and I had to deal with Ambrose, who did not understand anything about Michel Portal. He thought, really, like, who is this old man who is asking me impossible things, and he speaks not a word of English. So that was the first nice experience. And then Jack, because of the big snow in front of his house, he could not come on the first rehearsal. So it was really like, I almost thought that these guys are not even, Scott was not really believing that it will be the real Jack, and Ambrose neither. So when he showed up the day after, that was very funny. I saw their faces, they were like, okay, it is a real Jack. Because none, Ambrose nor Scott, I remember when I called Scott to ask him, have you ever played with Jack DeJohnette? He was like, no, man. I was like, stupid to ask you, would you like to? Which I did. And he was like, silent for 10 seconds, like, are you making joke out of me or what? And so, well, there will be, would you like, of course. So, and Michel knew, Jack, because they played together in the past quite sometimes. And, but Jack didn't really understand who the fuck I was, being a young guy that he never heard of. So for the first 2 days of the recording, he was really checking me out. Like, he would sit down and play some McCoy Tyner's tunes, and then while I was next to the piano, because he's a great pianist. People maybe do not know, he even recorded 2 albums as a pianist. And he was playing it, and he would forget a very important chord, like da 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 da, and then like and I was next to him, speaking with somebody. Of course, I was more listening to Jack than the person I was speaking to. And then I was like, I'll tell him, Jack, try E flat sus. And he was like, oh yeah, you think so? Yeah, maybe. And like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Then he would turn and look at me. Yeah. So he was doing this like for 2 days, and I know this generation of the guys. They just want to check you out. If you're a jazz musician, did you pay your fucking dues? This very specific thing that exists in jazz, paying the dues.
Yeah.
That's why Jamie Ebersold called his albums like this, paying the dues. Yeah. So yeah, I paid my dues, man. I knew something about this music, and and then once he grasped me, we were, really super close, and he completely opened himself up, and I was more than welcome in his environment.
Yeah. So cool.
And from that moment, man, it was heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, I played with God. What do you want me to tell you?
Yeah. Quite cool.
And not just on one occasion, because he was doing the tour of 2 weeks, and I was, touring with him and speaking with him and listening to his iPod music, and it was like filled up with the albums that were never released, and concerts with Keith and Gary, and what you imagine. Well, yeah, that's what I lived through for 2 weeks. So that was a really great, what can I say, great experience that made me sleep a little bit better afterwards.
Yeah, I can imagine.
quality of my sleep improved.
That's a cool one. But I just wanted to ask you this also. You mentioned you produced the album, this one, but you produced Michel's Dockings also, right? With
Dockings, I was not credited for it. It's good that you speak about it, because I was doing this job, like I told you, almost since I met Michel.
Okay.
So when we were doing Dockings, it was with Steve Swallow and Joy Baron.
Joy Baron, yeah.
And I remember when we rehearsed only with Bruno Chevillon and myself. Michel, as usually, he had no chords. He doesn't write, he doesn't even write the chords, or very barely. He writes the melodies that are impossible to play on the piano, because it's something that works for bass playing, for whatever. And then he has no arrangements. So I was, of course, since the beginning, finding some arrangements and stuff like this. I mean, I would have been bored actually to play all this just in unison and not have any harmonic material to improvise over. But I was doing this simply because I had to. And actually, when we were in the studio, when it became obvious for Steve that there is no harmonic material, and Steve Swallow is somebody who really loves harmony. Then we were kind of, together working on this thing, and with Bruno as well. So I proposed the things. I told him, you see, guys, there's like eventually this can be a blues in F, which Michel didn't even know what I was speaking about. And then I would, because I first spoke English much better than Michel, which is still the case. And we basically, I produced a lot of the ideas that ended up on the album, but I was not credited for this, which is okay.
Yeah.
But then we did Dockings. That was the pure and simple proposition that I had to work on the album beforehand with him to help him get out his music, and then prepare all these things, send it to the guys in New York, work on the session, do the post-production, which I did, because we came out with the tunes that were long, 16 minutes. With Jack, when you start playing, then we would come to the end, because Jack is not a great sight reader. He wants to feel the music, and once he's got it, then it's good. But he takes his time. He can read, of course, but it's not his strongest side. His strong side is just his imagination and his the fact that he kept his teenager mind. Like, he's not afraid of jumping into total empty, and then whatever happens is welcome. But then we would come at the end of the take, and he wouldn't really go for the written end. Then he would start jamming like they do with Keith in trio. And then we would have like a tag of 7 minutes in which there would be like great things happening. And I was a producer and playing piano at the same time. That's quite specific in the situation. So we would finish the take, and I would tell everybody, "Woo, guys, thanks for this one. Yeah, beautiful." Then I would go to the sound room and find all the guys from Universal France, with their laptops and glasses looking at the screens, and I would come like, "So, what do you think?" And they would look at me like, "What? Well, what? The take? 16 minutes and 12 seconds. That was their comment,
Wow.
Yeah, come on, guys. Yeah. So I had to, enter and chop in a bit. To make it record, discable, as they say in France. And it was a pity, but somebody like Scott Colley and Jack Dagenet, if I would like take out the 3 minutes of the tune, it would still be in the same tempo. And of course, we didn't work with click. No.
Sure.
So it was great. It was great. It's really one of the great experiences, and I learned a lot, of course, as a producer.
I wanted to ask you about that.
So
what's your role? What's your role as a producer? I mean, like compared. I mean, I know with Amira, I listened to the stuff you did, and it's beautiful. What you do. She has such an amazing voice, so special. And you work again as a piano player and as a producer there. But I wanted to ask you, like, how do you make a huge difference between being a musician or a producer, or this is kind of really connected with you, or how do you approach these two things?
Look, I realized first time I entered the studio here as a jazz pianist. I already had, when I was in Belgrade, being more into the rock or jazz rock or pop waters as well. I already had experience with the studios back in Belgrade. And I had experience with the gear, with equalizers, frequencies, buttons, being obsessed as a kid by synthesizers, filters, resonances, attacks, decays, releases, compressors, sound. And I mean, I've listened to so much music, starting by the Beatles, that were my first love. I had Revolver when I was 6. And Revolver as an album is the most innovative, the album with the biggest number of innovations in history of pop music. It's like one of the first loops is on this album.
Wow.
All the techniques, So of course I was into this since I was 6 years old. And I realized when I found myself here in France at the studio as a sideman, that there was a big conflict between the sound engineers and jazz musicians, because both of these persons, they have a very high ego, especially in France. They consider themselves artists in a same way as musicians. But very often the jazz musicians, they don't give a dime about knowing something about frequencies. I'm talking about 90s, end of the 80s and 90s. They didn't know anything about microphones. They didn't know anything about recording techniques, and they didn't give a fuck. The only thing, even if they were beginners, they would approach it, being a bit like uncomfortable, but you have to defend yourself because that's what somebody told them. Then they would say, no, I don't hear it's not my sound, like change something, And that would very quickly lead to the conflict situation, which I didn't like. Then I would mingle in as a nobody and tell the guys something about frequencies, and, they would look at me like, okay, he at least knows what to tell us about what the other guys want. Because I was speaking their language a little bit. Then, of course, I developed this thing because I still was interested in buttons and stuff like this. The fact that I was practicing acoustic piano most of the time and playing standards back then didn't stop me from being interested in the music and my other interests. So basically, that's how I ended up. My first album was recorded by David Baker, who was one of the best engineers in New York at that time. So the quality of the recording was from the start something that I was holding to. And of course, recording with somebody like David Baker, this first album, The Quartet, we did in Sear Sound. It was one of the beginnings of the digital recording. And he had the speciality of mixing while recording. So it was direct to two-track, direct on stereo. So there was no mixing afterwards.
Oh, amazing.
So very interesting. Then I discovered all the digital things about editing and stuff like this. And it took me, some years to get interested in Pro Tools and stuff like this. So basically, why am I speaking all these things? Because as a musician, I had the means of discussing the technical side with technicians, with sound engineers. And that gave me this position, which is a half of position of what you call producer. You have to know how to speak both with musicians and with technicians. And then, of course, you have all these other aspects about business and money, but that goes most for executive producer. But me being a kind of a central person that is supposed to make this entire thing come to a happy end, real happy end. You have to have these skills. And I realized quite early that it's not a problem for me. It doesn't make me feel as a waste of time as a pianist if I have to deal with all these other things. And, in the meantime, I really met so many different generations of musicians coming from different styles. Quite a lot of them were very known. And all this gives me, and I have a name that some, in most of the situation, the people know who I am and they respect me a forehead, which is good when you are pretending to be somebody who is supposed to, lead the session. That's good to have this thing as well. So, basically everything was there. And I saw no reason to refuse this position because it came in my world as a logical thing. So that's what I like doing nowadays a lot.
Yeah, that's good. Especially nowadays, that's good to do. Yeah, I mean, also financially speaking and everything. So.
Oh man, I definitely look forward to continuing doing this because the second album we did with Michel, I mean, I really. Like I told you, it was a great time to. I mean, I produced Amira's last album and Michel's album during the pandemic thing. So that's quite something. I was productive in spite of the lack of the concerts.
Just one last thing, not to take too much of your time. You played on some albums of one of my favorite musicians, which is Nguyen. And I wanted to ask you, it's talking. We started with me saying that you're a chameleon, so it's a good kind of endings in a way. But it's funny because he comes from Vietnam and he has his own heritage, and you come from the Balkans. You have this also part of your history. It's quite similar in a way, although it's so distant. But how did you connect with him? Because those records are so incredible. And how is your story with him? I mean, when did that start?
The story is beautiful. Of course, being in La Belle Bleue since '93, and having all these albums that I did, and then '95 I did the album with Kudsi. Nguyen is born in Paris, from Vietnamese parents, and he already had this band called Ultramarine. Which basically was really like a gathering of different cultures in a more weather report oriented thing. I mean, inspired. There were two bands actually. First one that did this was Ultramarine. Second one was Sixon.
Oh yeah, Sixon.
So these were the bands that gave some kind of a French weather reports in a very particular way, because one of the main thing about France is that there are a lot of communities, cultural communities from people coming from other countries. I think it's one of the most open cities where these communities are not closed and living among them, like it's the case in Germany, for example. Maybe it's opening slowly, but believe me, I mean, back in '70s, I know that in Germany you had such a huge potential of percussion players from Turkey, and I never saw a German band having a guy from Turkey. And there was already quite some precedents in France with this mixing of the guys from Caribs with guys from African countries. It's not at all the same thing. That's what you learn pretty quickly when you're in France. If you see the black guys from Caribbeans and black guys from Africa, well, it's the same shit. You risk to find yourself in an open fire. Because it is the only thing that is eventually common is the color of their skin. But his history is completely different. It's interesting. So whatever, and then a guy from Balkans and
everywhere.
So I met Nguyen on several festivals that I played with my bands and stuff like this, and he heard me and whatever. And I heard about Karim Ziad because I was already when we recorded Multi Don Culti, it was in '95. And it was already my researches of music from Africa, 12/8 in different way, nothing to do with the Balkans. This particular thing was really my research of African music and African rhythms. And I remember somebody said, well, this kind of rhythm, I think it was Francois Merville who said, well, what you're looking for is actually Karim Ziad. I was, who? Well, Karim Ziad. And then a year after, in '94, I was called by Khaled, the singer.
The famous.
So he invited me, his producer invited me to play on his album.
Oh, really?
Because he knew my albums, not just to do the piano studio guy, So I recorded one tune on the piano with Khaled, which is on the album Sahara, which is his most famous album, because that's where you have Aisha, Aisha.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah.
So whatever, I ended up playing there already, and it was like the first mixing of the Arabian thing with the Balkan piano, and apparently that made me known in the world of musicians from Morocco and Algeria, which is a huge community in Paris. So basically what happens is that Nguyen sends me this call to see if I would be interesting to be the part of this thing, and I see that it's about the music that I was working on, and I knew I didn't understand it right, because I was listening to their Moroccan radio stations in Algeria and here in Paris, and I would listen to this while driving a car, all the time. But I was like amazed, man. I don't understand. I don't know where's one. And somebody who passed all this jazz shit before, not knowing where's the beat. Yeah. Like, you don't let this thing pass just like this, So yeah, I wanted to discover a lot about this music. So of course I was amazed to be invited on this kind of a project. And I listened to the computer demos that Nguyen did, because very often he does like this. He records the half acoustic instruments with the simulations of the computer. Then he makes the arrangements, and then he replaces it with the real musicians in the studio. So basically, I remember when I started listening to this, and I was like, where the hell is one? And he made a big mistake, Nguyen, because he sent me the sheet music that was written in 3x4. Okay. As a 3/4, while the thing was actually 4x3.
Oh, wow.
So which is not the same thing as and he even made it harder for me, because when I was looking at this thing written and what I was hearing, it made no sense. Then I asked Karim, basically, because they did this album together. Yeah. But Karim didn't know how, and still doesn't know how to read notes. So Nguyen did all these, arrangements and stuff like this. But the idea was definitely Karim's, And so we did this recording, and it was, I wanted to learn this music by heart. And the tunes were very, very difficult. And, the arrangement that he wrote to them. But it was a big challenge. So I learned it, and with a lot of help from Karim. That's when we really got close. And then, we played for 20 years after, and we had this trio with Julien Lourau. I don't know if you know this album, but basically it was great, for me, because I was present at the moment where this particular sound, which as well became like a standard sound of Maghreb music or guys from Africa. I mean, for all of them, this is like the reference number one. This album, So maybe you can call it luck, you can call it whatever, but I was there in quite some moments where some interesting things were happening.
Definitely, definitely.
Dr. Jazz.